Maya's hands trembled on the coffee pot when two bodyguards walked in and addressed the frail old man at table 7 as Harold Westbrook, one of the richest men in America. She had cried to him about her mother's death and her crushing debt, never knowing he could write a check to solve everything without feeling it, never suspecting the mornings she'd treasured were built on a lie. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin in the most ordinary places. For Maya Chun, a 26-year-old waitress at Rosie's Corner Diner, that place was table 7 by the window, where the morning sun painted golden stripes across the worn vinyl booth. For Harold Westbrook, a man whose name appeared on buildings across 3 continents, it was the first place in decades where no one knew who he was. She saw him as just another lonely old man who liked his coffee black and his eggs over easy. He saw her as the first person in 50 years who looked at him without calculation, without agenda, without the weight of his billions casting shadows across every interaction. Neither of them knew that their simple morning routine would unravel secrets that would shake the foundations of one of America's most powerful families, expose a conspiracy that had festered for generations, and prove that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness carry the heaviest consequences. The brass bell above Rosie's Corner Diner door chimed at 6:45 every morning, as reliable as the sunrise itself. Maya Chun didn't need to look up from wiping down the counter to know who it was. The shuffling footsteps, the slight wheeze of breath, a gentle tap of a wooden cane against the checkered linoleum floor. It was him, the old man. She'd been calling him that in her head for the past 3 months, ever since he first appeared on a cold Tuesday morning in January, looking lost and somehow relieved to be so. "Good morning," she called out, grabbing a clean mug from beneath the counter. Her voice carried the practiced warmth of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of making strangers feel like regulars. "Your usual table is waiting." The old man's face, a landscape of deep wrinkles and age spots, creased into a smile. His eyes, though clouded slightly with the milky film of approaching cataracts, sparkled with genuine pleasure. "Your blessing, young lady." "A blessing." His voice was gravelly but refined, the kind of voice that suggested a past filled with boardrooms and important decisions, though Maya never asked. She'd learned long ago that the best waitresses knew when to talk and when to simply listen. He made his way to table 7, the booth by the window where the morning light was kindest. Maya watched him settle into his seat with the careful deliberation of someone whose bones had begun to betray them. He was always dressed simply but neatly, clean pressed trousers, a cardigan over a button-down shirt, comfortable shoes that had seen better days but were polished with care. Everything about him suggested a man who had once been someone, who had held himself to standards that hadn't diminished even as his circumstances apparently had. Maya poured his coffee, the steam rising between them like a curtain of secrets. "Black, no sugar," she said, setting the mug down gently, "and I'll get your eggs started. For easy, whole wheat toast, side of fruit salad." "You know me too well," he said, wrapping his weathered hands around the mug as if drawing warmth from more than just the coffee. "Danger," Maya laughed, a sound that had become rare in recent months. Knowing how someone likes their eggs isn't exactly states, though if you ever want to switch it up, scrambled or poached, I'm trained for that level of chaos. "I'm a creature of habit," he admitted. "At my age, consistency is comfort." He took a sip, his eyes closing briefly in appreciation. "Besides, why would I change anything about this? Perfect coffee, perfect company, perfect peace." There was something in the way he said that last word, peace, that made Maya pause. It wasn't just the satisfaction of a good breakfast, it was the relief of a man who had found something he'd been desperately seeking. She wanted to ask him about it, about the story she could see lurking behind his eyes, but the kitchen bell dinged, her cue that another order was ready, and the moment passed. The diner filled slowly with the morning crowd. Truck drivers on their routes, nurses ending night shifts, construction workers fueling up before heading to job sites. Maya moved between them with practiced efficiency, coffee pot in one hand, order pad in the other, her mind working 3 steps ahead. But even in the chaos of the breakfast rush, she kept one eye on table 7, making sure the old man's mug stayed full, that his meal came out exactly right, that no one bothered him during his quiet time with the newspaper he always brought. She noticed things about him that others might have missed. The way his hands trembled slightly when he lifted his fork, not from age alone but from something else, perhaps a palsy or the after effects of a stroke. The way he ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it might be his last. The way he always left exactly $15 on the table even though his meal only cost $8.50, tipping more than 80% without ever making a show of it. The way he sometimes stared out the window with an expression of profound loneliness that made Maya's heart ache. She had her own loneliness to contend with. The diner job was supposed to be temporary, a way to pay the bills while she figured out what came next after her mother's death 6 months ago. Cancer had taken Teresa Chun quickly, brutally, leaving Maya adrift in a city that suddenly felt too big and too empty. The studio apartment they'd shared was now just hers, filled with echoes and memories and the crushing weight of student loan debt from a nursing degree she abandoned halfway through to care for her mother full-time. Every morning Maya woke up and made a choice to keep going, to put on the blue uniform, to smile at strangers, to pour coffee and pretend that purpose was something you could manufacture through routine. And every morning when the old man walked through that door, she felt fractionally less alone. There was something about caring for him, ensuring his breakfast was perfect, making sure he had what he needed, that filled a hollow space inside her. It was a pale echo of the caregiving she'd done for her mother, but it was enough to get her through the day. "You look tired today," the old man said one morning in late March, about 2 weeks after he'd become a fixture at table 7. His observation caught her off guard. She'd been refilling his coffee, her mind elsewhere, and his words pulled her back to the present. "Just a late night," she said with a practiced smile. "Nothing to worry about." He studied her with those clouded eyes that somehow saw too much. "Young people shouldn't have old eyes," he said quietly, "but yours look ancient today. Whatever burden you're carrying, I hope you have someone to help you bear it." Maya felt an unexpected sting of tears. She blinked them back quickly. Professionally, "I'm fine, really, but thank you for asking. Not many people do." "Then they're fools," he said with surprising sharpness. "When someone brings you perfect coffee every morning, still remembers that you like extra napkins and always seats you where the sun hits just right, the least you can do is notice when they're suffering." She didn't know what to say to that, so she simply squeezed his shoulder gently, a brief human contact that felt monumental in its intimacy, and moved on to her other tables. But something had shifted between them. The invisible wall between server and customer had developed a crack. After that morning, their conversations deepened. He asked about her life, and she found herself telling him things she hadn't shared with anyone. About her mother, about the abandoned nursing degree, about the crushing debt, and the feeling that her life was a train that had jumped the tracks and she had no idea how to get it back on course. He listened with the kind of attention that had become rare in the world, not interrupting, not offering empty platitudes, just receiving her words as if they mattered. In turn, she learned fragments of his story, though he offered them sparingly, like precious coins he was reluctant to spend. He'd had a family once, children who were now grown and gone. He'd worked in business, though he never specified what kind. He'd traveled the world, but had come to realize that home wasn't a place on a map, but a feeling you had to search for. He'd made mistakes, big ones, the kind that haunted you in the dark hours before dawn, and he was trying, in whatever time he had left, to figure out if redemption was possible, or if some sins were simply too heavy to ever put down. "Why do you come here?" Maya asked him one morning in early April. The diner was nearly empty, the breakfast rush over, leaving them in a bubble of quiet. "I mean, there are nicer places. Places with actual tablecloths and menus that don't have laminated pictures." He smiled, that weathered face transforming into something almost boyish. "That's exactly why I come here, because it's real. Because the coffee tastes like coffee should taste, bitter and honest. Because you don't care who I am or what I've done. You just care that my eggs are cooked right and my coffee stays hot. Do you have any idea how rare that is? To be seen as just a person, not as a means to an end?" Maya thought she understood, though she couldn't imagine what kind of life would make someone crave anonymity in a place like Rosie's Corner Diner. "Everyone wants to be somebody," she said, "don't they?" "Only people who've never been somebody," he replied. "Once you've been defined by what you have instead of who you are, all you want is to disappear. To find one place, one person who doesn't want anything from you except to refill your coffee and maybe share a kind word." His words lingered with her throughout the day, burrowing into the spaces where her own loneliness lived. She began to look forward to their morning conversations more than she wanted to admit. He became more than just a regular customer. He became a lifeline, a daily reminder that connection was still possible even in the aftermath of loss. She noticed other things too, details that seemed insignificant at the time but would later take on profound meaning. The way he always sat facing the door as if expecting someone, the slight tension that gripped him whenever someone new entered the diner, a wariness that suggested a past marked by threats she couldn't imagine, the fact that he never carried a wallet, always paying with exact cash from his pocket as if he didn't want to reveal even the small details that identification cards carried. And then there was the morning everything changed, the morning that would split her life in two before and after, the morning when two men in dark suits walked through the door of Rosie's Corner Diner and shattered the fragile peace the old man had found at table 7. It was a Thursday morning, unseasonably warm for April, when everything Maya thought she knew about the old man dissolved like sugar in hot coffee. The breakfast rush had thinned to a comfortable lull, leaving just a handful of regulars scattered across the diner's worn booths. Harold, as she'd finally learned his first name, sat at table 7 with his newspaper, reading glasses perched on his nose, completely absorbed in whatever article had captured his attention. Maya was refilling salt shakers behind the counter when the bell above the door chimed with an urgency that felt different, sharper, like a warning shot across a bow. Two men entered, and the atmosphere in the diner shifted immediately. They weren't the usual customers. Everything about them screamed money and power, from their perfectly tailored dark suits that probably cost more than Maya made in 6 months, to their polished leather shoes that had never seen a scuff, to the way they moved with the fluid confidence of apex predators who'd never known what it meant to be prey. One was tall and broad-shouldered, with steel gray hair cut with military precision. The other was younger, late 30s perhaps, with sharp features and eyes that cataloged everything in seconds. Both wore earpieces, the thin wires barely visible against their necks. Maya's first thought was that they were federal agents. Her second thought, when she saw the way they scanned the room with professional efficiency before their gazes locked onto table 7, was that whoever they were looking for was in serious trouble. Harold's newspaper lowered slowly. The color drained from his face, not the pale of surprise, but the ashen gray of someone whose worst fear had just materialized. His hands, which had been steady moments before, began to tremble. The tremor wasn't from age or illness. It was from something deeper, something that looked almost like resignation. The two men crossed the diner in long strides. Maya's protective instincts flared. Whatever was happening, Harold looked terrified, and that was enough for her to move. She grabbed the coffee pot and intercepted them halfway across the floor, positioning herself between them and table 7 with a bright, professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning, gentlemen. Can I get you a table? Coffee? Our special today is blueberry pancakes with maple sausage. Absolutely delicious." The older man, the one with gray hair, barely glanced at her. His attention remained fixed on Harold with an intensity that made Maya's skin prickle. "We're not here for breakfast, miss. Please step aside." "Actually," Maya said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "this is a private establishment and you're making my customers uncomfortable. So unless you'd like to order something, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The younger man's expression flickered with something like amusement. He looked at her properly for the first time, taking in her name tag, her defensive posture, the coffee pot she was gripping like a weapon. "Miss Chun," he said, reading her name tag, "we're not here to cause trouble. We're here for Miss Ruck." He gestured toward Harold. "It's time to go home, sir." Harold hadn't moved. He sat frozen in the booth, staring at the two men with an expression Maya had never seen on his face before. It was defeat, absolute and total, the look of a man watching the last good thing in his life slip away. "I'm not going," Harold said quietly. His voice carried none of its usual warmth. It was flat, hollow. "I told you all, I'm done. I'm finished with that life." The gray-haired man's expression softened fractionally. "Sir, with all due respect, you don't have that luxury. The board meeting is in 4 hours. The Singapore deal is falling apart. Your son has made 3 decisions in the past week that have cost the company over $200 million. Your daughter-in-law is threatening a very public divorce that will expose certain financial arrangements that cannot, under any circumstances, become public knowledge. The shareholders are in open revolt. You disappearing for 3 months hasn't solved anything. It's made everything worse." Each word landed like a physical blow. Maya watched Harold shrink into himself, the weight of whatever world he'd been running from settling back onto his shoulders like an iron yoke. But it was the words themselves that made her mind reel. Board meeting, Singapore deal, company, shareholders. These weren't the problems of a lonely old man living on a fixed income. These were the problems of someone else entirely. "Who are you?" Maya asked Harold directly, her voice barely above a whisper. The coffee pot felt suddenly heavy in her hand. "Really, who are you?" Harold looked up at her and she saw tears gathering in his clouded eyes. The morning light from the window cast half his face in shadow, making him look older, more fragile, and yet somehow more significant than before. "I'm sorry, Maya. I should have told you. I wanted to, but I was afraid that if you knew, everything would change, that you'd look at me differently, that this place, these mornings with you, would stop being the one pure thing in my life." "Mr. Westbrook," the younger man said, his tone gentler now, almost apologetic. "We need to leave, now. The car's waiting outside." Westbrook. The name detonated in Maya's consciousness like a bomb. Westbrook. Harold Westbrook. She'd heard that name before, seen it in newspapers, heard it on the news, though she'd never paid much attention. Westbrook Industries. Westbrook Tower. The Westbrook Foundation. Harold Westbrook, the billionaire industrialist who'd built an empire in manufacturing and technology, who'd been on the cover of Forbes magazine more times than she could count, who was reportedly worth somewhere north of $8 billion. The old man at table 7 who tipped 80% on an $8 breakfast, who shuffled in every morning with a wooden cane and worn but polished shoes, who'd listened to her cry about student loan debt and her dead mother, who'd told her that perfect coffee and kind words were treasures beyond price, was one of the richest men in America. "You're Harold Westbrook," Maya said. It wasn't a question. "The billionaire Harold Westbrook. The articles, the magazines, Westbrook Industries, that's you." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, hollow and distant. "I was Harold Westbrook," corrected quietly. "For 3 months, I've been trying very hard to just be Harold. Just a man who likes his eggs over easy and his coffee black. Just someone who could have a conversation without wondering what the other person wanted from him." He looked at her with desperate intensity. "You never wanted anything from me, Maya. Do you understand how rare that is, how precious?" The younger bodyguard cleared his throat. "Sir, please, we're running out of time." Harold stood slowly, every movement weighted with reluctance. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his usual $15, laying it on the table with shaking hands. Then he reached into his other pocket and withdrew something else, pressing it into Maya's palm before she could react. It was a business card, heavy stock, embossed lettering. Harold J. Westbrook, Chairman and CEO, Westbrook Industries. Below that, a private phone number. "If you ever need anything," he said, his voice breaking. "Anything at all. Your student loans, a job, help of any kind, you call that number. Please, Let me do this one thing. Let me help someone who helped me without knowing who I was, without wanting anything in return. Maya stared at the card, her emotions a chaotic storm. Anger, betrayal, confusion, and beneath it all a profound sadness. He'd lied to her. Not directly, perhaps, but by omission. Every conversation they'd had been built on a foundation of falsehood. The lonely old man was a fiction, a character he'd played while she'd poured out her genuine pain to him. You lied to me, she said, her voice tight. Every morning you sat there and let me believe you were just like the rest of us. Struggling, ordinary, real, but you're not real. This, she gestured at the booth, the coffee mug, the abandoned newspaper. None of this was real. It was the most real thing in my life, Harold insisted. Maya, please understand. When you have as much money as I do, when your name opens doors and silences rooms, when people calculate the value of your attention down to the dollar, you forget what it's like to be seen as just a person. You gave me that. You gave me 3 months of being human again. The gray-haired bodyguard gently took Harold's arm. We really must go, sir. The car has been waiting for 20 minutes. We're exposed here. Harold allowed himself to be guided toward the door, but he kept his eyes on Maya, pleading silently for understanding she wasn't ready to give. At the door, he paused. You said your mother taught you that the measure of a person isn't what they have, but what they give when they have nothing to gain from it. You told me that. You lived it. I was just trying to learn how to do the same. Then he was gone, ushered into a black limousine that Maya hadn't noticed, idling at the curb. Through the window, she could see more suited figures inside. A whole entourage waiting to reclaim their wayward billionaire and drag him back into whatever gilded cage he'd been trying to escape. The diner felt emptier than it ever had. The other customers who'd watched the whole scene with wide eyes and whispered speculation slowly returned to their meals. Rosie, the owner, emerged from the kitchen with her perpetually skeptical expression. Friend of yours? Rosie asked, nodding toward the departed limousine. I thought he was, Maya said quietly. She looked down at the business card still clutched in her hand, at the $15 on table 7, at the half-finished coffee going cold. I thought I knew him. Rosie made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. In this business, you learn pretty quick that everyone's got secrets. The question isn't whether they lied, it's whether they lied about the things that matter. Maya didn't respond. She couldn't because she didn't know the answer. Had Harold lied about the things that mattered? Their conversations had felt genuine. His interest in her life, his gentle wisdom, the way he'd listened to her grief without trying to fix it, those things had felt real. But how could anything be real when the foundation was built on such a massive deception? She picked up the $15 in the business card, slipping both into her apron pocket. The morning shift continued. More customers came and went. She poured coffee, took orders, delivered food, smiled and chatted with the easy professionalism she'd perfected, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying every conversation she'd had with Harold, examining each one for cracks, for signs of the immense wealth he'd been hiding, for proof that she'd been played for a fool by a bored billionaire looking for an amusing diversion from his real life. Table 7 remained empty for the rest of her shift. No one sat there, as if the space itself had been marked by what had happened. Maya found herself glancing at it repeatedly, half expecting to see Harold shuffle through the door with his cane and his newspaper, ready to pretend that nothing had changed. But the door stayed closed and table 7 stayed empty, and Maya was left with nothing but questions and a business card that felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket. The days after Harold's departure felt like walking through a world drained of color. Maya went through the motions of her life with mechanical precision, pouring coffee, taking orders, delivering plates, collecting tips, but some essential part of her had shut down. Table 7 remained empty. Other customers sat there occasionally, but Maya found herself avoiding it, assigning it to Sarah, the other morning waitress, whenever possible. She couldn't bear to look at that spot by the window where Harold had sat for 3 months, where he'd listened to her grief and offered quiet wisdom, where he'd made her feel less alone in the world. The business card stayed in her wallet, tucked behind her expired student ID, a constant presence she tried to ignore. She'd pull out cash to pay for groceries or subway fare and catch a glimpse of that heavy embossed cardstock, and a fresh wave of confused emotions would crash over her. Anger at the deception, sadness at the loss, curiosity about his life, his world, the empire he'd abandoned for 3 months to sit in a cheap diner and pretend to be ordinary. And beneath it all, a nagging question that wouldn't leave her alone. Had any of it been real? Rosie noticed, of course. Nothing escaped Rosie's sharp eyes. On Maya's 5th day of going through the motions like a ghost haunting her own life, the owner cornered her during the late afternoon lull. You planning on moping forever, or are you going to do something about it? Rosie asked, her gravelly voice carrying the bluntness of someone who'd spent 40 years running a diner and had no patience for self-pity. Do something about what? Maya replied, wiping down a counter that was already clean. About the fact that you're walking around here like someone died, about the old man, about whatever the hell happened that's got you acting like a zombie in a blue uniform. Maya's hand stilled on the counter. Nothing happened. He was a customer. He left. End of story. Rosie snorted, a sound that conveyed decades of accumulated skepticism. Kid, I'd been in this business since before you were born. I know the difference between a customer and something more. That man came here every single morning for 3 months. He sat at the same table, ordered the same meal, and looked at you like you hung the moon. Then his people came and dragged him back to whatever palace he escaped from, and you've been heartbroken ever since. I'm not heartbroken, Maya protested, but the words felt hollow even to her own ears. I'm just disappointed. He lied to me. Did he? Rosie challenged. Or did he just not tell you something you never asked about? You ever straight up ask him if he was a billionaire? The question hit harder than Maya expected. No, she hadn't asked. She'd made assumptions based on his clothes, his demeanor, the way he paid in exact cash. She'd seen what she expected to see. A lonely old man on a fixed income, someone not so different from the person she was afraid of becoming. But he'd never actually lied. He just allowed her assumptions to stand unchallenged. It doesn't matter, Maya said, but her voice lacked conviction. He's gone back to his real life, the one with mansions and private jets and board meetings. And what we had here, it was just a vacation for him. Billionaire playing pretend. Or maybe it was the opposite, Rosie suggested. Maybe his real life is the pretend part, and what he had here was the only true thing in his world. She reached out and squeezed Maya's shoulder with a weathered hand. Life's too short to waste time being stubborn, kid. If you care about him, and I think you do, then stop punishing him for having money and start asking yourself what you're really afraid of. That conversation haunted Maya through the rest of her shift and into the night. As she lay in her small apartment staring at the ceiling where the streetlight cast moving shadows, she forced herself to examine her feelings honestly. What was she really afraid of? That Harold had used her? That seemed less likely the more she thought about it. He'd gained nothing from their relationship except conversation and mediocre diner coffee. That she'd been stupid to trust him, perhaps. But being betrayed by trust said more about the betrayer than the trusting. No, what terrified her was something deeper and more painful. She was afraid that the connection she'd felt, the first real human connection since her mother's death, had been conditional. That Harold's affection for her existed only in the context of the diner, only when he was playing the role of ordinary man. That in his real world, surrounded by his real life, she would be invisible again, irrelevant, just another nameless face in the service industry, someone who poured coffee for more important people. The fear kept her paralyzed for 2 more days. And then, on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after Harold's departure, something happened that changed everything. Maya was opening the diner with Rosie, going through the familiar routine of brewing coffee and setting up the condiment station, when a woman walked in who didn't belong. She was probably in her early 40s, dressed in an expensive navy suit that screamed corporate lawyer or executive, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her heels clicking against the linoleum with authority. She looked around the diner with barely concealed distaste, as if she'd stumbled into a location far beneath her usual standards. "Is one of you Maya-chan?" the woman asked, her voice crisp and professional. "That's me," Maya said, straightening up. Her first thought was that she was being sued for something, though she couldn't imagine what. "Can I help you?" The woman pulled a thick manila envelope from her designer briefcase and held it out. "I'm Christine Walters, General Counsel for Westbrook Industries. Mr. Westbrook asked me to deliver this to you personally." She said it with the tone of someone performing a task she found distasteful but necessary. Maya took the envelope with trembling hands. "What is it?" "I'm not at liberty to say. My instructions were to deliver it into your hands directly and to inform you that Mr. Westbrook wishes to speak with you at your earliest convenience." She produced another business card, this one her own. You can reach me at that number to arrange a meeting. Is he okay?" The question burst out before Maya could stop it. "Harold, is he all right?" Christine Walters' expression flickered with something that might have been surprise or sympathy, quickly masked. "He's as well as can be expected given the circumstances." "The meeting, Miss Chun, will you agree to it?" Maya looked down at the envelope, then at the business card, then at the lawyer who represented a world so far removed from her own it might as well be another planet. Every instinct told her to refuse, to hand back the envelope, to protect herself from whatever complications were about to crash into her simple life. But beneath those instincts was the memory of Harold's eyes in those last moments before his bodyguards led him away. The desperate plea for understanding, the raw vulnerability of a man who'd found something precious and had it ripped away. "Think about it," Maya said finally. "Think quickly," Christine advised. "Mr. Westbrook is under considerable pressure. The board is questioning his competency. His family is circling like sharks. Every day that passes makes his situation more precarious." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Miss Chun, I've worked for Harold Westbrook for 15 years. I've never seen him fight for anything the way he's fighting for the right to explain himself to you. Whatever you think he's done, whatever you think this is about, I'd encourage you to hear him out." Then she was gone, leaving Maya standing in the empty diner holding an envelope that felt like it contained either answers or more questions. She wasn't sure which. Rosie appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, you going to open it or just stare at it all day?" Maya's fingers worked at the sealed flap. Inside was a sheaf of papers, official-looking documents with legal letterhead. She pulled them out and began to read, her eyes widening with each line. They were payment confirmations. Her student loans, all $73,000 of them, marked as paid in full. A letter from the billing department of St. Catherine's Hospital confirming that the final medical bills from her mother's treatment, another $42,000 that had been crushing her with their weight, had been satisfied. A cashier's check made out to her name for $50,000 with a note in elegant handwriting. "For the nursing degree you should finish, and for whatever comes after, you deserve the chance to dream again. He paid off your debts," Rosie said quietly, reading over her shoulder. "All of them." Maya couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face. Hot, and unbidden. It was too much. The generosity was overwhelming, but it was also complicated. This wasn't just kindness, this was power. This was a billionaire reaching into her life and rearranging it with the casual ease that came from having unlimited resources. Part of her wanted to be grateful. Part of her was terrified by the implications. There was more in the envelope. A handwritten letter on expensive stationery, Harold's neat script filling 2 pages. Maya sank into the nearest booth and read. The letter began with an apology. He was sorry for the deception, sorry for allowing her to believe he was someone he wasn't, sorry for the inevitable complications his identity would bring into her life, but he wasn't sorry for the time they'd spent together, for the conversations that had meant more to him than she could possibly understand. He explained that he'd left his life 3 months ago in the middle of the night, unable to bear one more day of being Harold Westbrook, prisoner of his own success. He checked into a modest hotel under a false name with nothing but cash and a desperate need to remember what it felt like to be human. He'd found Rosie's by accident, and he'd found Maya by providence. The letter continued in Harold's careful handwriting, each word chosen with the precision of someone who understood that this might be his only chance to explain. Maya read through blurring tears, Rosie's hand warm on her shoulder as the morning sun streamed through the diner windows. Harold wrote about his life, the real one he'd been running from. He had built Westbrook Industries from the ground up after inheriting a failing manufacturing plant from his father. 40 years of 18-hour days, ruthless decisions, sacrificed relationships, and the gradual realization that success had cost him everything that made success worth having. His wife had died 5 years ago, a brilliant woman he'd loved but never really knew because he'd been too busy conquering the business world. His son Marcus had grown into a man he didn't recognize, someone who saw the company as a birthright rather than a responsibility, who made decisions based on quarterly profits rather than long-term sustainability. His daughter-in-law Jennifer, Marcus's wife, was a social climber who'd married the Westbrook name and fortune, not the man. His grandchildren barely knew him. He tried to retire twice before, Harold wrote, but each time the company had pulled him back. There was always a crisis. Always a deal that would fall apart without his personal involvement. Always a reason why he couldn't step away. Until one night, sitting alone in his $50 million penthouse overlooking the city, staring at a glass of scotch that had become his only companion, he'd realized he was waiting to die. Not living, just marking time until his heart finally gave out under the strain of being Harold J. Westbrook, titan of industry, and he could stop pretending that any of it mattered. So he'd left, taken nothing but cash and the clothes on his back, walked out of his own life like a man escaping prison, and for 3 months, in the mornings at table 7, he'd remembered what it felt like to be alive. To have someone care if he was tired or sad, someone who asked about his day not because they wanted something but because they genuinely cared. Someone who saw past the armor of wealth and power to the lonely old man underneath. The payments weren't charity, he insisted in the letter. They were gratitude. She'd given him something infinitely more valuable than money. She'd given him back his humanity. The debt payments were simply an acknowledgement of that gift, a way of evening the scales. He understood if she was angry, if she felt manipulated or used, but he hoped, desperately hoped, that she might find it in her heart to meet with him one more time, to let him explain in person, to give him the chance to show her that what they'd shared in those morning conversations wasn't a lie, wasn't a game, but the most honest relationship he'd had in decades. The letter ended with a plea. Please, Maya, don't let my money be the thing that destroys the only genuine connection I've made in years. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to let me try to deserve your forgiveness. Maya set the letter down with shaking hands. The weight of it, the raw vulnerability in those carefully chosen words threatened to overwhelm her. Rosie squeezed her shoulder once more and quietly retreated to the kitchen, giving her space to process. The diner began to fill with the morning crowd. Maya moved through her shift in a daze, her mind spinning with conflicting emotions. The debt payments changed everything and nothing. She was free now. Genuinely free for the first time since her mother's diagnosis. The crushing weight of that financial burden had been lifted as easily as someone brushing dust off a sleeve. She could go back to school. She could pursue the nursing degree her mother had been so proud of. She could dream again instead of just surviving. But the ease of it terrified her. Harold had reached into her life and fundamentally altered it with the stroke of a pen. What happened when someone had that kind of power? What did you owe them? How did you maintain any sense of self when someone could reshape your reality with their pocket change? She thought of her mother, who'd worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat, who'd taught Maya that dignity came from standing on your own 2 feet, from earning what you had. What would Teresa Chun think of her daughter accepting over $150,000 from a man she'd known for 3 months? But another voice whispered in her mind, quieter but persistent. Her mother had also taught her that pride was cold comfort when you were drowning, that there was no shame in accepting help from people who cared about you. That love in all its forms sometimes meant letting people carry your burdens when yours grew too heavy. Had Harold's help come come from love? She didn't know, but she knew it had come from genuine caring, from the connection they'd forged over black coffee and morning conversations. The day passed in a blur. Maya went home to her small apartment, Harold's letter clutched in her hand, Christine Walters' business card in her pocket. She sat at her tiny kitchen table, the same table where she'd eaten countless meals with her mother, where they'd laughed and cried and faced down the reality of terminal cancer together. She imagined what her mother would say if she were here now. Teresa Chun had been practical above all else. She would have looked at the paid bills, at the check for $50,000, at the opportunity to finish the nursing degree she'd sacrificed for caregiving, and she would have said what she always said when Maya faced a difficult decision. Follow your heart, but use your head. Don't be so proud that you refuse a blessing. Don't be so grateful that you forget who you are. Maya picked up her phone and dialed the number on Christine Walters' card before she could talk herself out of it. The lawyer answered on the second ring. "It's Chun. I'm glad you called. I'll meet with him," Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But on my terms. Not at his office or his mansion or anywhere in his world. If he wants to talk to me, he comes back to the diner, table 7, tomorrow morning, 6:45. There was a brief pause. "Miss Chun, you need to understand. Mr. Westbrook's schedule is extremely complicated right now. He has back-tape meetings, a board presentation, obligations that have been postponed for 3 months. Getting him free for several hours is difficult enough. Getting him to leave the building is nearly impossible. His family and the board are watching him constantly. Then I guess he needs to decide what's more important," Maya said firmly. "His schedule or this conversation? I'm not going to him, Ms. Walt. If this matters to him the way he says it does, he'll find a way." Another pause, longer this time. Then Christine Walters laughed, a genuine sound of surprised respect. "You know what, Miss Chun? I think you might be exactly what he needs. I'll make it happen. Tomorrow morning, 6:45, table 7. Maya hung up, feeling a strange mixture of triumph and terror. She'd drawn her line in the sand. Now she had to wait to see if Harold Westbrook, billionaire, would cross it. Sleep didn't come as easily that night. She lay awake running through imaginary conversations, planning what she would say, how she would maintain her dignity and independence, while acknowledging the generosity he'd shown. Part of her wanted to refuse the money, to hand back the check, and prove that she couldn't be bought or influenced, but that seemed childish. Cutting off her nose despite her face. The money was already spent on the debts. They were paid. Refusing the check wouldn't change that. It would just be a gesture, and an empty one at that. By the time her alarm went off at 5 in the morning, Maya had made her peace with accepting the help while maintaining her boundaries. She would thank Harold for the payments, acknowledge that they'd changed her life, but make it clear that this didn't obligate her to anything. That their relationship, whatever it was or could be, needed to exist separate from his money. That she needed to know if he could see her as an equal, not as a charity case or a pet project or a brief escape from his real life. She dressed in her uniform and walked to the diner through the pre-dawn darkness. Rosie was already there, brewing the first pots of coffee. The older woman took one look at Maya's face and nodded. "He coming?" "He's supposed to be," Maya said. "You ready for this?" Maya thought about that question. Was she ready to face Harold again? Ready to navigate the impossible complexity of a relationship between a waitress and a billionaire? Ready to risk caring about someone whose world was so far removed from hers that they might as well be different species? No. She wasn't ready, but she was here anyway. "I guess I'm about to find out," she said. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. 6:30 came and went. 6:40. 6:45 arrived and passed. Maya felt her heart sink. Of course he wasn't coming. His lawyer had probably told him that his demands were more important than a promise to a waitress. That he could send a representative, another lawyer, with more paperwork and polite excuses. That whatever he thought he needed to say could be handled through intermediaries. And then at 6:53, 8 minutes late, the bell above the door chimed. Harold Westbrook walked into the diner alone, no bodyguards, no entourage, just an old man in worn but polished shoes, leaning on a wooden cane, looking at her with hope and fear and desperate longing. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said quietly. It took some doing to slip away. Maya stood frozen behind the counter, coffee pot in hand, staring at Harold Westbrook as if he were a ghost made flesh. He looked different than he had a week ago. More tired, the weight of his world visible in the new lines around his eyes and the slight stoop of his shoulders. But he was here. He'd come. That simple fact meant more than Maya wanted to admit. "Your usual table is waiting," she said finally, echoing the words she'd said to him 100 times before, trying to recapture some of the easy rhythm they'd once shared. Harold's face transformed with relief and something deeper, something that looked like coming home. He made his way to table 7, settling into the booth with the same careful deliberation she remembered. Maya followed, setting down a mug and filling it with coffee. Black, no sugar. Exactly as he liked it. The familiar ritual steadied her shaking hands. She slid into the seat across from him, something she'd never done during his previous visits. The change in their dynamic was immediately apparent. They were no longer waitress and customer. They were two people trying to navigate uncharted waters with no map and no guarantee of safe harbor. "You came alone," Maya observed. "Your bodyguards must be having a panic attack." "They are." Harold confirmed with a faint smile. Marcus is probably calling the FBI as we speak. Christine covered for me, told them I had a private meeting with a consultant. She's very good at creative truths. He wrapped his hands around the coffee mug, that same gesture of seeking warmth she'd noticed so many times before. I had to come alone, Maya. This conversation couldn't happen with witnesses, with people whose job is to manage my image and protect the Westbrook name. I needed it to be just us, like it was before. Before you were a billionaire? Maya asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Before I knew that the lonely old man act was just that, an act. It wasn't an act, Harold said quietly, his blue eyes meeting hers with unflinching honesty. The loneliness was real. The need to escape was real. The connection I felt with you was the most real thing in my life. I just didn't tell you the whole truth about who I was. You didn't tell me any truth about who you were, Maya corrected. You let me believe you were someone struggling, someone ordinary, someone like me. Do you have any idea how that felt? Realizing that I'd been pouring my heart out to one of the richest men in America, crying about my student loans to someone who could pay them off without even noticing the money was gone. Is that why you're angry? Harold asked gently. Because I have money? Or because you feel like I was laughing at your problems? Maya felt tears prick at her eyes. I don't know what I feel. I'm grateful for what you did, paying off the debts. That generosity changed my life, but it also terrified me. You have so much power, Harold. You've reached into my life and rearranged it like moving pieces on a chessboard. What happens when someone has that kind of influence over you? How do I ever see you as an equal when you can solve my biggest problems with pocket change? Harold was silent for a long moment, staring into his coffee as if it held answers. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Do you know what I see when I look at you, Maya? I see someone who worked double shifts to pay for her mother's medicine, someone who sacrificed her own dreams to be a caregiver, someone who treats every customer with dignity and kindness, even when she's exhausted and grieving, someone with more strength and grace than anyone I've ever met in my entire life. You think I have power over you because of my money? You have no idea the power you have. You made me want to be a better person. You made me remember what it feels like to care about something beyond profit margins and stock prices. Those are beautiful words, Maya said, wiping at her eyes, but they don't change reality. You're Harold Westbrook. I'm a diner waitress. Your world and mine don't overlap, they can't. Why not? Harold challenged. Because society says so? Because there's an unwritten rule that billionaires and waitresses can't be friends, can't care about each other? I've spent my entire life following rules, Maya, following expectations, being who everyone needed me to be, and it left me hollow, empty, waiting to die in a penthouse that costs more than most people make in 10 lifetimes. I don't want to follow those rules anymore. But what is that? Maya asked, frustration and confusion warring in her voice. What are you proposing here, Harold? That we just go back to how things were? You show up for breakfast and we pretend you're not one of the most powerful men in the world? I'm proposing that we figure it out together, Harold said. I don't have all the answers. I just know that losing this was the hardest thing I've faced in decades. Harder than any business deal, any boardroom battle, any crisis the company has weathered. You matter to me, Maya, not as a charity case, not as a pet project, but as the person who reminded me that I'm still human underneath all the money and power and expectations. Maya wanted to believe him. She wanted it so desperately it physically hurt, but doubt gnawed at her. The practical voice that sounded like her mother asking the hard questions. What happens when you get bored of playing ordinary? What happens when the novelty wears off and you remember that you have a rempire to run and I'm just a girl who pours coffee? Harold reached across the table and took her hand, his skin warm and papery thin. Maya, I'm 73 years old. I've built companies, made fortunes, traveled the world, met presidents and kings, and none of it, not one single moment of it, has made me feel as alive as these past 3 months sitting in this booth with you. That's not novelty. That's not boredom waiting to happen. That's the truth. The diner door chimed and a handful of early customers filtered in. Rosie appeared from the kitchen, took one look at Maya and Harold, and smoothly redirected the newcomers to other tables, giving them space. But the interruption broke the intensity of the moment, bringing Maya back to reality. I need time, she said finally. Time to process all of this. Time to figure out what I want, not just what you need or what seems logical. This past week has been overwhelming. The money, the letter, everything. I can't just jump back into whatever this is without understanding what it means. Harold nodded, disappointment flickering across his face, but acceptance winning out. I understand. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Well, he amended with a rueful smile. I'm going back to the office and to board meetings and to putting out fires my son started. But I'm not leaving the city. I'm not disappearing again. When you're ready to talk, I'll be here. Or there, he gestured vaguely toward the world beyond the diner. Wherever you need me to be. He stood slowly, leaving his usual $15 on the table. Maya looked at the money and shook her head. You don't need to tip anymore. Not after everything you've already done. It's not a tip, Harold said softly. It's a thank you for the coffee and the conversation. It's what I've always left. Letting me keep that small gesture of normalcy would mean a great deal. Maya picked up the bills and held them out. Then leave $5 like a normal person. Not 80%, not billionaire money, just normal. For the first time that morning, Harold laughed. a genuine sound of surprised delight. He took back 2 of the bills and left $5 on the table. Better? Better, Maya confirmed, found herself smiling despite everything. Harold made his way to the door, then paused and turned back. Maya, one more thing. The money I gave you, the debt payments, the check, that's yours unconditional. No strings, no expectations. Whether you decide you want me in your life or not, that doesn't change. You deserve the chance to dream again. Please don't let pride or fear or anger at me stop you from taking it. Then he was gone, slipping out into the morning bustle of the city. Maya watched through the window as a black car that had been idling down the block pulled up immediately. The bodyguards had been there all along, watching from a distance, giving Harold the illusion of freedom while still protecting him. It was, she realized, a perfect metaphor for his entire life, surrounded by luxury and security, but ultimately trapped by it. The week that followed Harold's return was the strangest of Maya's life. She went through the motions of her job at the diner, but everything felt different now, charged with possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. The check for $50,000 sat in her bank account like a live wire, untouched, while she wrestled with what accepting it truly meant. The debt payments were done, irreversible, but this money felt different. It represented a future, choices, a path forward that her mother had dreamed of for her. Taking it felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. Rosie watched her internal struggle with the patience of someone who'd seen every human drama play out in the confines of her diner over 4 decades. Finally, on Thursday afternoon during the lull between lunch and dinner, she cornered Maya at the counter. "You're being an idiot," Rosie announced without preamble. "That money is sitting there, doing nothing, while you work double shifts and live in that shoebox apartment. Your mother would be furious with you." "Mom taught me to stand on my own 2 feet, Maya protested. "To earn what I have. Your mother also taught you not to be too proud to accept help when it's offered with love." Rosie fixed her with a stern look. "That man didn't give you money to control you or buy you. He gave it to you because watching you struggle with debts that weren't your fault was killing him. There's a difference between charity and caring. Learn to tell them apart." The words hit home harder than Maya wanted to admit. That night, in her tiny apartment, she pulled out the acceptance letter she'd received years ago from the nursing program at City University. It had been her dream once to follow in her mother's footsteps, to care for people in their most vulnerable moments. She'd given it up without hesitation when Teresa got sick, and she'd told herself she'd made peace with that sacrifice. But holding the letter now, remembering the pride in her mother's eyes when it arrived, Maya felt something crack open inside her chest. She opened her laptop and navigated to the university's website. The nursing program still existed. They still accepted returning students. The application deadline for the fall semester was 3 weeks away. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling with fear and hope and the terrifying possibility of wanting something again after months of just surviving. Before she could talk herself out of it, she started typing. The application flowed from her fingers like water breaking through a dam. Her experience caring for her mother, her work ethic demonstrated by years at the diner, her understanding of what it meant to be on the receiving end of compassionate healthcare. She wrote about loss and resilience and the kind of nurse she wanted to become. She wrote until her eyes burned and her fingers cramped, and the sky outside her window began to lighten with dawn. When she finally hit submit, the weight that had been pressing on her chest for 6 months lifted fractionally. She'd taken the first step. She'd chosen to accept Harold's gift, not as surrender, but as fuel for her own dreams. Her mother would have approved. The next morning at the diner, Maya felt different, lighter. She moved through her shift with renewed energy, and when she looked at table 7, she no longer felt the complicated tangle of anger and confusion and fear. She felt something simpler, hope. Her phone buzzed during her afternoon break, an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Miss Chun, this is Christine Walters. I hope I'm not disturbing you." Maya stepped outside into the alley behind the diner, away from the clatter and conversation. "No, it's fine. Is everything okay? Is Harold all right?" "He's fine. Well, he's managing." Christine's voice carried a note of dry humor. "The board meeting yesterday was contentious. His son is pushing for a vote of no confidence. The vultures are circling, but that's not why I'm calling. Emmer Westbrook asked me to extend an invitation to you. There's a gala tomorrow night, the Westbrook Foundation annual charity ball. It's a tedious affair. All speeches and canopsa and wealthy people patting themselves on the back for writing checks. But Harold would very much like you to attend. As his guest, Maya's first instinct was to refuse. A charity gala in Harold's world. She'd be completely out of her depth, surrounded by people who would see exactly what she was, an outsider. Someone who didn't belong. But then she thought about Harold's words. "I don't want to follow those rules anymore." If they were going to figure out whether their 2 worlds could coexist, she couldn't always make him come to her territory. She had to be brave enough to step into his. "Okay," Maya said before she could change her mind. "I'll come, but I don't have anything to wear to something like that." "Already handled," Christine said with efficiency that suggested she'd anticipated. "A stylist will come to your apartment tomorrow at 3. Dress, shoes, jewelry, hair, makeup, everything. Just give me your address." Maya provided it, feeling like she was signing up for something far more significant than a party. After she hung up, she stood in the alley staring at her phone, wondering what she'd just agreed to. The next day passed in a surreal blur. The stylist arrived with an entourage and transformed Maya's apartment into a makeshift salon on. The dress they brought was midnight blue silk that flowed like water, elegant and simple, nothing like the ostentatious gowns she'd imagined. They did her makeup with a light touch that enhanced rather than masked, and styled her hair in a simple updo that felt both sophisticated and true to herself. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like someone who could belong at a charity gala. Someone confident and polished, but underneath the silk and makeup she was still Maya Chun, waitress, daughter of immigrants, girl who'd spent the last year watching her mother die and drowning in debt. The dress couldn't change that. The question was whether it needed to. The car arrived at 7, not the intimidating limousine she'd feared, but a simple black sedan with a kind-faced driver who helped her in without making her feel inadequate. The drive through the city felt like traveling between worlds. They left behind her neighborhood of bodegas and laundromats and entered a realm of gleaming towers and doormen in uniforms. The gala was held at the Westbrook Tower, a statement of corporate power that dominated the skyline. Maya's stomach churned as they pulled up to the entrance where photographers lined the red carpet and beautiful people in expensive clothes glided past. The driver opened her door and suddenly she was stepping out into a world that felt more alien than anything she'd ever experienced. A hand appeared in her field of vision, steadying her. She looked up to find Harold waiting at the entrance, distinguished in a tailored tuxedo, but his eyes held the same warmth and vulnerability she remembered from table 7. He'd been watching for her, waiting so she wouldn't have to walk in alone. "You came," he said softly, wonder in his voice as if he'd doubted she would. "You invited me," Maya replied, taking his offered arm. "I couldn't let you face all these people alone." Harold laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy. "They're the ones who should worry. You, Miss Chun, are going to steal the show." They entered together, and Maya felt the weight of hundreds of eyes turning toward them. The whispers started immediately, a wave of speculation and curiosity. Who was this unknown woman on Harold Westbrook's arm? Where had she come from? What did she want? Harold felt her tense and squeezed her hand gently. "Ignore them," he murmured. "They're always looking for gossip. Give them nothing." They moved through the crowd, Harold introducing her to an endless stream of people whose names blurred together. Business partners, board members, society matrons, politicians. All of them looked at Maya with thinly veiled curiosity, assessing her worth, trying to place her in their complicated social hierarchy. Some were polite, others were coldly dismissive. Maya held her head high and remembered Rosie's words. "You're not less than them because they have more money. You're just different." The ballroom was a cathedral of wealth and power, all crystal chandeliers and marble columns and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a glittering view of the city below. Waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more per piece than Maya made in an hour. She accepted a glass of champagne mostly to have something to do with her hand, watching the social dynamics play out around her with the keen observation skills she'd developed through years of reading diner customers. These people were performing, she realized. Every conversation, every laugh, every casual touch was calculated. They were all playing roles in an elaborate theater production where the currency was influence and the stakes were fortunes. Harold moved through it with practiced ease, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes when he spoke to his peers. He was performing too, just like he'd been performing his entire life until he walked into Rosie's corner diner and allowed himself to stop. The performance shattered when a man approached them, younger than Harold by several decades, but with the same sharp blue eyes and aristocratic features. He was handsome in an aggressive way, his confidence bordering on arrogance, his tuxedo fitting him like armor. Maya knew who he was before Harold spoke, could see the family resemblance and the tension that immediately gripped Harold's frame. "Father," the man said, his voice carrying an edge that could cut glass. "What a surprise to see you actually attending the Foundation's event. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten you had obligations to this family." "Marcus," Harold replied, his tone carefully neutral. "I'm glad you could make it." "Maya, this is my son, Marcus Westbrook." "Marcus, this is Maya Chun." Marcus's gaze swept over Maya with the kind of assessment that made her feel like livestock being evaluated at auction. His expression revealed nothing, but she could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. Who was she? What did she want? How much of a threat did she pose to his interests? "Miss Chun," Marcus said, taking her hand in a grip that was just slightly too firm. "I don't believe we've met. Are you in the technology sector? Finance?" "I'm a waitress," Maya said clearly, refusing to be ashamed of it. "I work at a diner on 6th Street. The shock on Marcus's face would have been comical if it wasn't so insulting. "A waitress," he repeated flatly. "Brought a waitress to the Foundation Gala." His voice dropped to a hiss that Harold could still hear. "What are you trying to do, father? Make a mockery of everything this family has built? Turn yourself into tabloid fodder?" "I brought someone who matters to me," Harold said, his voice hardening. "Someone who sees me as a person rather than a bank account or a stepping stone to power. You might try it sometime, Marcus. It's remarkably refreshing." A woman appeared at Marcus's side, blonde and polished like an expensive piece of jewelry. She was younger than Marcus by at least 10 years. Her dress strategically designed to showcase considerable assets, both natural and purchased. Jennifer Westbrook, the daughter-in-law Harold had mentioned in his letter. the social climber who'd married the name. "What's all this tension?" Jennifer asked with false brightness, her eyes already assessing Maya with the sharp calculation of someone who viewed all other women as competition. Her gaze lingered on Maya's dress, probably pricing it, judging it, finding it wanting despite its elegance. "Marcus was just meeting Miss Chun," Harold said smoothly. "My guest for the evening." "Your guest," Jennifer repeated, her smile sharpening into something predatory. "How lovely. And how did you two meet?" "Through the Foundation's outreach programs." The implication was clear and cruel. She assumed Maya was a charity case, someone Harold had met through philanthropic work. Probably a sob story he'd taken pity on. Maya felt anger flare hot in her chest, but before she could respond, Harold stepped closer to her side, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of solidarity. "We met over coffee," Harold said, his voice carrying a warmth that had been absent when speaking to his son. "Maya has been kind enough to tolerate my company most mornings for the past several months. She's also the reason I've decided to make some significant changes to my priorities." "Changes," Marcus said, his voice dangerous. "What kind of change?" "The kind we'll discuss at the board meeting next week," Harold replied. "But since you brought it up, I'll tell you now. I'm stepping down as CEO, effective the end of the quarter." The pronouncement landed like a bomb. Marcus's face went white, then red. Jennifer's perfectly maintained composure cracked. Around them, conversations died as people turned to stare, sensing drama in the air like sharks smelling blood. "You can't be serious," Marcus said, his voice rising. "You're 73 years old and you're finally doing the sensible thing? The thing I've been asking you to do for 5 years?" "I'm doing it on my terms," Harold clarified. "I'm stepping down as CEO, but I'm retaining my position as chairman of the board. I'm also establishing a new voting structure that will prevent any single person from having unilateral control over the company's direction. There will be checks and balances, oversight, accountability." Marcus's expression transformed from shock to fury. "This is because of her, isn't it?" He jabbed a finger toward Maya. "Some waitress bats her eyes at you and suddenly you're making decisions. That will affect thousands of employees and billions in shareholder value. This is elder abuse. This is manipulation. Watch your tone when speaking about Miss Chun," Harold said, his voice dropping to a register Maya had never heard from him before. It was the voice of a man who'd built an empire, who'd crushed competitors and weathered hostile takeover attempts, who'd earned his reputation for being ruthless when necessary. Marcus actually took a step back. Maya had heard enough. She'd been silent through the exchange, letting Harold handle his family. She wouldn't stand by while someone accused her of manipulation. She stepped forward, meeting Marcus's hostile glare with calm composure. "Mr. Westbrook," she said, addressing Marcus with pointed formality, "I understand you're upset. You've been waiting for your inheritance, and now you're worried it won't come on your terms. But I have no interest in your family's money. I didn't know who your father was when we became friends. I don't want anything from him except his company. His actual company, not the corporate kind. So you can take your accusations of manipulation and choke on them, because the only person manipulating anyone here is you, trying to guilt your father into giving you control of something you haven't earned." The ballroom had gone completely silent. Everyone was watching now, not even pretending to look away. Jennifer's mouth had fallen open in shock. Marcus looked like he'd been slapped, and Harold was staring at Maya with an expression of awed admiration. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Marcus snarled, his composure completely shattered. "I'm someone who actually cares about your father as a person," Maya shot back. "When's the last time you asked him how he was feeling? Not how the company was performing, not what the quarterly projections looked like, but how he was. When's the last time you had a conversation with him that wasn't about money or power or what you could get from him?" Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The answer was written on his face. He couldn't remember. Perhaps he never had. Harold took Maya's hand, squeezing it gently. "I think," he said, addressing the gathered crowd who were still watching with rapt attention, "that this is a good time to remind everyone why we're here. The Westbrook Foundation exists to support causes and people who need help, not to serve as a stage for family drama. So please enjoy the evening, support the foundation, and give me and my guests some privacy." He guided Maya toward the edge of the ballroom, away from the staring crowds and the shell-shocked expressions of his family. They found a quiet alcove near the windows, a small oasis of relative peace in the chaos. "I'm sorry," Maya said immediately. "I shouldn't have said those things to your son. That was out of line." Harold's response was not what Maya expected. He didn't look angry or embarrassed by her outburst. Instead, he was smiling, a genuine expression of pure joy that transformed his entire face. "That was magnificent," he said softly. "I don't think anyone has spoken to Marcus like that in his entire privileged life. You said everything I've wanted to say for years, but couldn't because I was trying to be diplomatic, trying to preserve some semblance of family unity." "I still shouldn't have done it," Maya insisted, though she felt a flutter of satisfaction despite herself. "This is your world, your family. I had no right to insert myself into that situation." "You had every right," Harold countered. "He was attacking you, making vile accusations because you threaten his comfortable narrative, because you represent something he spent his whole life avoiding. Genuine human connection that isn't transaction." He took her hands in his expression turning serious. "Maya, I need to tell you something. When I announced I was stepping down as CEO, that wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision prompted by Marcus's rudeness. I've been planning it for weeks. You didn't manipulate me into anything. You simply gave me the courage to do what I had known I needed to do for years. The words settled over Maya like a warm blanket. She'd been carrying the fear that she was somehow responsible for disrupting his life, that her presence had caused chaos in his carefully ordered world. To hear him say she'd given him courage rather than created problems shifted something fundamental in how she viewed their relationship. So what happens now, Maya asked. Your son hates me. Your daughter-in-law probably thinks I'm a gold digger. Half the people in that ballroom are going to be gossiping about the waitress who insulted Marcus Westbrook to his face. Now, Harold said with a gleam in his eye, we dance, and we show them all that I don't care what they think, that I'm done living my life according to their expectations and judgments. He led her to the dance floor where a live orchestra was playing something slow and elegant. Maya hesitated, suddenly aware that she'd never learned formal dancing, that she was about to embarrass herself in front of hundreds of people who already thought she didn't belong. I don't know how, she whispered urgently. I've never done this kind of dancing. Neither have I. Not really, Harold admitted. I've performed it thousands of times at events like this, but I've never actually enjoyed it. Let's figure it out together. Just follow my lead and forget everyone else exists. He placed one hand on her waist, took her other hand in his, and began to move. Maya stumbled at first, self-conscious and clumsy, but Harold was patient, guiding her gently, adjusting to her rhythm rather than forcing her to match his. Gradually, she began to relax, to feel the music, to move with him rather than against him. They weren't perfect or graceful, but they were genuine, and that was more important than technical precision. As they danced, Maya became aware of the stares, the whispers, the phones discreetly raised to capture photos and videos that would undoubtedly be all over social media within hours. Tomorrow she would be internet famous for all the wrong reasons. The waitress who crashed high society. The nobody who seduced a billionaire. The gold digger who manipulated an old man. The narratives would be vicious and creative, and there was nothing she could do to stop them. But right now, in this moment, with Harold's arms around her and the music swelling around them, none of it mattered. She saw the joy in his eyes, the freedom he felt in defying expectations, and she realized something profound. Their relationship had never been about him rescuing her from her circumstances. It was about them rescuing each other from the prisons they'd built for themselves. His prison was money and power and the crushing weight of legacy. Hers was grief and debt and the fear of dreaming again. Together they'd found the keys. The song ended and another began. They danced through 3 more pieces, lost in their own world, before Harold finally let her off the floor. They collected their coats and slipped out a side entrance, avoiding the main lobby where photographers still lingered. The cool night air felt like freedom. Would you like to take a walk? Harold asked. There's a park a few blocks from here. I'd like to show you something. They walked through the illuminated streets, Harold's bodyguards trailing at a discreet distance. The park was small but beautifully maintained, with old trees and winding paths lit by vintage lampposts. Harold led her to a bench overlooking a small pond where the city lights reflected like fallen stars. This is where I came, Harold said quietly, after I left my life. That first night when I walked out of my penthouse with nothing but cash and a desperate need to disappear. I ended up here sitting on this bench trying to figure out what I was going to do. I was terrified. I'd spent my entire adult life being Harold Westbrook, and suddenly I was just Harold. No empire, no responsibilities, no identity except what I could build from nothing. It was the most frightening and exhilarating night of my life. What made you choose the diner? Maya asked. Out of all the places you could have gone? Chance, Harold said with a small smile. Or fate, if you believe in that sort of thing. I was walking the next morning, just exploring the city like a tourist in my own home. I passed Rosie's and smelled coffee and breakfast, and I thought, that's what normal people do. They go to diners and eat breakfast and nobody cares who they are. So I went in, and there you were with your tired smile and your genuine warmth, treating me like I was just another customer. I came back the next day because I wanted to feel that again. And the day after that, and before I knew it, those mornings became the only part of my day I looked forward to. Maya leaned against his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. I was so angry at you for lying, she said softly, but I think I understand now. You weren't lying about who you were. You were trying to remember who you were before you became what everyone else needed you to be. Exactly, Harold said, relief evident in his voice, and you helped me remember. You saw past the performance to the person underneath. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious? They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city lights shimmer on the water. Maya thought about everything that had happened over the past few months. The death of her mother, the crushing debt, the job at the diner that was supposed to be temporary but had become her whole world, meeting Harold, discovering who he really was, tonight's confrontation, the nursing school application waiting for a response. Her entire life had been turned upside down and she was still figuring out which way was up. Harold, Maya said finally, what are we doing, really doing? Because I need to know if this is real or if it's just two lonely people finding comfort in each other because we're both running from something. Harold turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. I can't speak for you, Maya, but for me, this is the most real thing in my life. I'm not running anymore. I'm choosing to step back from the company because I've given it enough of my life. I'm choosing to rebuild relationships with my grandchildren who barely know me. I'm choosing to spend whatever time I have left doing things that matter, with people who matter. And you matter, Maya. You matter more than you know. But what does that look like? Maya pressed. You're still Harold Westbrook. You still have obligations, a family, a life that doesn't include waitresses from the wrong side of town. How do we bridge that gap? We build something new, Harold said simply. Something that belongs to neither of our old worlds but creates a new one. I don't have all the answers, Maya. I just know that trying to figure it out with you is better than the alternative of going back to my life pretending you never happened. Maya felt tears prick at her eyes. She'd been so afraid of being hurt, of being dismissed as a temporary distraction in his life. But looking at his face in the lamplight, seeing the vulnerability and hope and determination there, she realized that her fear had been blinding her to the obvious truth. He was just as scared as she was, just as uncertain, just as hopeful that something beautiful could grow from the most unlikely of connections. The media storm hit the next morning with the force of a hurricane. Maya woke to 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and her face plastered across gossip websites with headlines that ranged from curious to cruel. Mystery woman steals billionaire's heart. Gold digger targets elderly tycoon. Westbrook heir furious over father's new girlfriend. The photos from the gala had been dissected frame by frame, her dress analyzed, her background investigated, her entire life reduced to clickbait. Rosie called before Maya could even process the scale of the attention. Get down to the diner, the owner said without preamble. There are reporters outside. I'm not letting them harass my customers, but you need to see this. Maya threw on clothes and made her way to the diner through back streets, avoiding the main avenues where she might be recognized. When she arrived, she found Rosie standing guard at the entrance, arms crossed, glaring at 3 reporters with cameras and microphones who were trying to gain entry. I told you this is a private establishment, Rosie was saying, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd ejected countless troublemakers over the years. You want to eat breakfast? You're welcome. You want to harass my staff? You can get the hell out. The reporters scattered when they saw Maya approaching, shouting questions that blurred together into incomprehensible noise. She ducked inside the diner where several regular customers looked up with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. Word had clearly spread. Small-town dynamics existed even in big cities, especially in neighborhoods like this where everyone knew everyone's business. So you're dating a billionaire, old Mike said from his usual spot at the counter. He was a retired postal worker who'd been coming to Rosie's for 20 years. Never saw that coming. I'm not dating anyone, Maya said automatically, then stopped. Was she? What exactly was her relationship with Harold? They hadn't defined it, hadn't put labels on something that defied easy categorization. Friends seemed inadequate. Romantic interest felt premature. Whatever they were, it existed in the undefined space between worlds. Her phone rang, Harold's private number. She stepped into the back office to take the call. Maya, are you all right? His voice was tight with concern. I've seen the headlines. I'm so sorry. I should have anticipated this. Should have protected you from the media attention. It's not your fault, Maya said, though part of her wanted to blame someone for the invasion of her privacy. You didn't take those photos or write those articles. But I brought you into my world, Harold insisted. I made you visible to people who make their living tearing others down. My lawyers are already drafting cease and desist letters for the worst of the defamation, but the damage is done. Your face is out there now. Your privacy is compromised. Maya sank into Rosie's battered office chair, suddenly exhausted despite the day having barely begun. So what do? Do I hide? Do I make a statement? Do I pretend none of this is happening? You do whatever feels right to you, Harold said gently. But Maya, I need you to know something. This attention, this scrutiny, it's not going to go away. Not completely. If you choose to have me in your life, this is part of what comes with it. The invasive questions, the assumptions, the constant judgment. I won't blame you if you decide it's too much. I won't hold it against you if you choose to walk away. The offer hung in the air between them, genuine and heartbreak. He was giving her an out, protecting her from the consequences of caring about him. And she realized that this was the test. The real one. Not whether she could handle wearing a fancy dress to a gala or standing up to his son, but whether she could handle this, the relentless exposure, the loss of anonymity, the world's opinion weighing on every moment of her life. I'm not walking away, Maya heard herself say. The words surprised her, but once spoken, they felt true. I'm not going to let reporters and internet trolls dictate my choices. If they want to judge me for caring about you, let them. I know the truth. You know the truth. That's what matters. She could hear the relief in Harold's breathing, the tension releasing. Thank you, he said quietly. You're braver than you know. After they hung up, Maya returned to the diner floor where the breakfast rush was in full swing despite the reporters lurking outside. She moved through her shift with determination, refusing to hide or apologize for existing. Some customers avoided eye contact, uncomfortable with her sudden notoriety. Others offered quiet words of support. Old Mike left her a $20 tip on a $6 breakfast, his silent endorsement worth more than any tabloid's opinion. The day passed in a strange blur of normalcy, punctuated by surreal moments. A text from Christine Walters with legal advice on handling media inquiries, an email from City University confirming receipt of her nursing school application, a call from Sarah, her fellow waitress, checking to make sure she was okay and offering to cover her shifts if she needed time away. Small kindnesses that reminded her she wasn't alone in navigating this chaos. That evening, as her shift ended, a familiar black sedan pulled up to the curb, but it wasn't Harold who emerged. It was Marcus Westbrook, his expression carefully neutral, though Maya could see the effort it cost him to be civil. "Miss Chun," he said, approaching the diner entrance but not entering, respecting the boundary of her territory. "I wonder if I might have a moment of your time." Maya's first instinct was to refuse, to send him away with the same cutting words she'd used at the gala, but something in his demeanor stopped her. He looked tired, defeated even, stripped of the arrogant confidence he'd worn like armor the night before. "5 minutes," Maya said, stepping outside. "Say what you came to say." Marcus took a deep breath, clearly struggling with words that didn't come naturally to him. "I owe you an apology. What I said last night, the accusations I made, they were out of line. You were right. I don't know my father, not really. I know the CEO, the board chairman, the business legend, but I don't know the person, and that's my failure, not yours." Maya studied him, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but she saw only regret and perhaps the first stirrings of self-awareness. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because my daughter asked me a question this morning," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "She's 12. She read some of the articles about you and my father, and she asked me if Grandpa was happy." Such a simple question, and I couldn't answer it. I couldn't tell my own daughter if my father was happy because I'd never bothered to notice or care. I'd only ever cared about when he was going to give me control of the company. That must have been a difficult realization, Maya said, her anger softening fractionally. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Marcus continued. "I'm not even asking you to like me, but I am asking you to understand that this situation, my father's decision to step down, his relationship with you, it's forcing me to confront some ugly truths about myself. And maybe that's not a bad thing." Maya saw glimpses of Harold in Marcus's face, in the way his eyes held a similar vulnerability when stripped of pretense. She thought about what Harold had said, about choosing to spend his remaining time on things that mattered, with people who mattered. Perhaps Marcus was capable of the same evolution, given the chance. "Your father talks about you more than you might think," Maya said quietly. "He's proud of you, even when he's frustrated by your choices. He wants a relationship with you that goes beyond business, but that's going to require you to see him as something other than an obstacle to your "I know," Marcus said simply. "I'm not sure I know how to do that, but I'm willing to try, for my daughter's sake, for my father's sake, maybe even for my own." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Those debt payments my father made on your behalf, the check he gave you for school, that wasn't manipulation or control. That's who he is. He sees people struggling and he helps because He's been doing it quietly for decades, funding scholarships and medical treatments and business loans for people who had no idea where the money came from. You're not special because you're the only one he's helped. You're special because you're the only one who helped him back." 3 months later, Maya stood in front of City University's nursing building, acceptance letter in hand, feeling the weight of a dream deferred finally becoming reality. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the promise of new beginnings. Students flowed around her, young and eager, most of them fresh from high school while she was 26, and carrying the weight of loss and hard-won wisdom. But she belonged here. She'd earned this. Her phone buzzed with a text from Harold. "Proud of you doesn't begin to cover it. Coffee after your first class?" She smiled and typed back a reply. "Table 7 at noon? Wouldn't miss it for the world." The past 3 months had been a journey of adjustment and discovery for both of them. Harold had officially stepped down as CEO, though he remained chairman of the board, providing guidance without the crushing daily responsibilities. Marcus had taken the position, and to everyone's surprise, including his own, he was approaching it with newfound humility and a genuine desire to honor the company's legacy rather than simply exploit it. Father and son had begun meeting for breakfast once a week, awkward at first, but gradually finding their way towards something that resembled a real relationship. Jennifer had filed for divorce, as Harold had predicted she would, but Marcus had handled it with unexpected grace, finally seeing clearly the transactional nature of a marriage he'd entered for the wrong reasons. His daughter Emily had become a regular visitor to both Harold's penthouse and, surprisingly, to Rosie's corner diner, where she sat at table 7 doing homework while her grandfather and Maya shared coffee and conversation. The media attention had faded, as it always did, moving on to the next scandal, the next unlikely romance, the next headline. There were still occasional articles, still whispers and speculation, but Maya had learned to tune them out. She'd discovered that living authentically was the best response to judgment. Let them talk. She knew her truth. Harold had kept his promise. He hadn't disappeared back into his old life and forgotten her. Instead, he'd found a way to bridge their two worlds, spending mornings at the diner before heading to board meetings, attending Maya's study groups to ask questions and offer encouragement, showing up at Rosie's on busy Saturday mornings to help bus tables because he claimed it kept him grounded. He was impossibly both Harold Westbrook the billionaire and Harold the man who liked his eggs over easy. and he'd finally learned how to be both without losing himself in either role. Maya pushed through the doors of the nursing building and found her classroom. The professor was young, passionate, explaining the philosophy of care that would guide their studies. Maya took notes with the diligence of someone who understood that this education was both a gift and a responsibility. She thought of her mother, who would have been so proud. She thought of Harold, who'd made this possible not just with his money, but with his belief that she deserved the chance to dream again. At noon, she walked into Rosie's to find Harold already at table 7, newspapers spread before him, coffee steaming in his mug. He looked up when she entered, and his entire face transformed with joy. It still amazed her that she could bring that kind of happiness to someone simply by walking through a door. "How was the first day?" he asked as she slid into the seat across from him. The same seat she'd taken that morning 3 months ago when they'd had their first real conversation after his identity was revealed. Terrifying and exhilarating, Maya admitted. "I'm the oldest student in most of my class. I have no idea if I can keep up with kids who are 8 years younger than me and probably smarter." "Smarter?" Harold scoffed gently. "Maya, you've lived more life than most of them will experience in a decade. You understand suffering and resilience and the value of compassion in ways they can't yet comprehend. That's not something you learn from a textbook. That's something you carry in your bones." Rosie appeared with the coffee pot, topping off Harold's mug and pouring one for Maya. "Look at you two," she said with gruff affection. "Still taking up my best table. Still drinking all my coffee. Some things never change." "Some things shouldn't," Harold replied with a smile. After Rosie retreated, Maya reached across the table and took Harold's hand. "I need to tell you something," she said seriously. "These past few months, figuring out how to make this work between us, it hasn't been easy. We're from different worlds, we always will be. But you've taught me something important. It's not about where you start or how much money you have or what world you come from. It's about choosing every single day to show up for the people who matter, to see them, really see them, not as what they can do for you, but as who they are." Harold's eyes grew misty. "You taught me the same thing. I spent 73 years measuring my worth by my accomplishments, my net worth, my influence. And then you showed me that the most valuable thing I could offer anyone was simply paying attention, caring, being present." He squeezed her hand. "I don't know what we are to each other, Maya. Friend seems inadequate, but whatever this is, it's the most important relationship of my life." "Mine too," Maya said softly. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped across the worn Formica table, while the diner hummed with life around them. Old Mike was at the counter reading his newspaper. Sarah was taking orders from a young couple in the corner booth. A trucker was paying his bill, leaving a generous tip. The coffee machine hissed. The griddle sizzled. The bell above the door chimed as new customers entered. It was beautifully, perfectly ordinary. It was home. Emily burst through the door, backpack bouncing, her face alight with the uncomplicated joy of a 12-year-old who just aced a math test. "Grandpa, Maya, guess what?" She slid into the booth next to Harold, already launching into an animated story about her day. Harold caught Maya's eye over his granddaughter's head, and in that glance was everything they'd fought for, everything they'd built, a family that wasn't defined by blood or money but by choice and care. A life that was messy and complicated and spanned impossible distances between penthouse apartments and cheap diners, but was real in ways that mattered more than anything else. Later that evening, after Emily had been picked up by Marcus, after the dinner rush had subsided and Maya's shift had ended, she and Harold took another walk to the park where his journey had begun. They sat on the same bench overlooking the pond, watching the city lights reflect on the water. "Do you ever regret it?" Maya asked, "Walking away from your life that night, starting all of this?" Harold was quiet for a moment, considering. "I regret the years I wasted," he said finally. "The relationships I neglected, the moments I missed because I was too busy building an empire. But walking away, finding you, learning what really matters?" He shook his head. "That's the best decision I ever made. Even with all the complications, all the media attention, all the family drama, I'd do it again in a heartbeat." Maya leaned against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the solid presence of someone who'd chosen her not because she was useful or profitable or beneficial to his image, but simply because she saw him, really saw him, and he'd done the same for her. Sometimes the most extraordinary connections are forged in the most ordinary places. A cheap diner, a cup of black coffee, a morning conversation between two lonely souls who found each other by accident and held on by choice. They come from different worlds, those two, the waitress and the billionaire, but they built a bridge between those worlds out of coffee and kindness and the radical act of seeing each other as fully human. And every morning when the bell above the door at Rosie's Corner Diner chimed at 6:45, Harold Westbrook still walked in with his wooden cane and his worn but polished shoes. Maya still poured his coffee, black, no sugar. They still shared the quiet moments before the rush began. Two people who understood that real wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the simple, profound gift of being known and accepted exactly as you are. Table 7 remained their sacred space, a reminder that some of the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold, only recognized and cherished. And in a world that often measured worth by net value and social status, they'd found something infinitely more precious, a connection built on genuine care, a relationship that transcended circumstance, and the kind of friendship that comes along once in a lifetime, if you're lucky enough to recognize it when it appeared.